Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. This is January 30th, 2026. This is our first webinar of the 2026 season. Our first topic is going to be life, death, and dinner in the forest canopy, spruce budworm, and its predators. So my name is Gary Wyatt. I'm Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension, part of our forestry team based out of Mankato Regional Office. Also helping host the webinar here is Lauren Beckus, our regional support staff at Andover. She's been very helpful over the years and attended many of the Fridays with the Forester. Today's topic and speaker is life, death, and dinner in the forest canopy, a review of spruce budworm and its predators. Dr. Jessica Roots, forest entomologist, and there's her email. I'll show that again later in the presentation as we end our slides after Jessica's presentation. The chat is going to be you'll be able to look at it, but you won't be able to chat in chat. But the links of the spruce budworm and other resources will be in the chat. Please make note of that. And then we want you to ask questions in the Q&A section of your Zoom. All of our webinars are going to be recorded and available at z.umn.edu/Fridays. We'll try and end today's presentation at 10 o'clock, and those will be available on our Fridays website at the YouTube University website. Jessica, I'm going to stop sharing and you can start.
Sounds great. Thank you, Gary.
Yes.
Let's see here. All right, how's that looking?
Wonderful. Full screen looks great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Right. Well, today, I just want to say thank you to the UMN Extension team for having me come here and talk. I always love talking about nature, so it's really my pleasure to be here. Today, we're going to be discussing the spruce budworm and its predators. The title is kind of reflecting the drama that we've been living next to here in Minnesota. Life, death, and dinner in the forest canopy. So today specifically, we're going to talk about spruce budworm basics, kind of what is the spruce budworm, what does it eat, what is its life cycle, outbreaks, what those are and why they happen, who eats the spruce budworm, and after I talk about the spruce budworm a bit, you're going to want to know who does that, why these predators matter, and then also kind of the implications for our forests here. So a little bit about me is, as Gary said, I'm a recent graduate. I just got my doctorate, technically December 31st, so it's very, very new. And yeah, when I first signed up, I wasn't sure when that was going to be disseminated, so I was excited to get it. It's all very new for me. I started graduate school in 2021, and I worked on spruce budworm the entire time. I was with the Alkema Forest Entomology Lab at the UMN, and that's where I did all of my research. While I was in grad school, I looked at impacts from moose in areas that were affected by spruce budworm and were trying to regenerate or recover from that outbreak, and the impact that moose had on that forest regeneration. I looked at areas in Isle Royale as well as northern Minnesota, areas near the boundary waters, and kind of compared the two spaces. I also looked at insect natural enemies, which is kind of our focus for today, not just insect natural enemies, but natural enemies of the spruce budworm, both in Isle Royale and Minnesota. Both areas actually had no background in what predators were there, so that was kind of a new study. And then lastly, I looked at the connectivity of spruce budworm populations across the landscape, kind of looking at flight patterns. So who is our main character today? It is the eastern spruce budworm, and that's its full name. There are several there's several budworm species out there, and I'll be referring to this one as the spruce budworm for the rest of this presentation, but there's also others known as, jack pine budworm, western spruce budworm. So today we're just going to call it spruce budworm, and these are two images that are kind of like the iconic life stages of this insect. So it starts early in the year as a caterpillar, feeds on, trees, needles, cones of balsam fir and spruce trees, and then later in the summer, it emerges as an adult moth. And so you see the juvenile stage here on the left and the adult stage there on the right. So, how does it get to an adult? Well, it emerges in late April, early May as a very, very small caterpillar. The image here is of a of a cone, and it just kind of feeds on needles and cones until it becomes a mature larva. And this is an image of it at its latest larval stage. There are 6 stages that it goes through before it becomes a mature larva. So it just kind of feeds most of the summer. That's when it causes most of the damage. And then it pupates, which is basically when it becomes a cocoon. And then it stays in this phase for about 10 to 14 days. And during that time frame, it matures into an adult moth. Before emerging as an adult moth, it kind of does what is called an eclosion, where it comes out of the cocoon. It comes out as an adult moth. The adult moths live about 2 weeks, during which time they don't really eat. They don't actually have mouth parts to eat much, but they do mate and then they lay eggs, and that's their whole prerogative for the rest of the summer. And these are the egg masses. These egg masses are kind of like a light mint green that are found on the ends and or tips of needles of its host trees, which again are balsam fir and spruce, specifically white spruce. And from here, really, really young, very, very small caterpillars will emerge, and then they'll kind of get ready for the winter by creating what's called a hibernaculum. So where is the eastern spruce budworm? There's a lot of colors here, so don't get too overwhelmed. We're actually going to just be focusing on the dark yellow here at the top. That's the spruce budworm that we're talking about. All of these other colors are representative of other budworm that are found in North America. And so, like I said, there's several out there. But we're focusing on eastern spruce budworm today, and their range is actually reaching from all the way from the East Coast almost to the further end of the West Coast up in northern North America. So here in Minnesota, lots of it in like northeastern North America. And the way the range is determined is basically where the host trees are found. And so the host trees are balsam fir, like I mentioned, and white spruce. And balsam fir, I think of it as kind of like a friendly tree. If you reach out for it, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to poke you. So friendly fir is how I like to think of it. And then we also have spruce trees. Spruces are a little bit more sassy. And I like the alliteration there. It helps me remember. But yeah, and specifically its host tree that it likes is white spruce over black spruce and other options. But its primary, despite its name being spruce budworm, its preferred host tree, its preferred #1 host tree is the balsam fir. These trees are often found in boreal forests, and these forests are found in northern regions across the globe. They have a mix of broadleaf deciduous hardwoods as well as needle-leaved conifers. Species can include jack, red, white pine, quaking aspen, paper birch, black spruce, balsam fir, white spruce, some white cedar, and then they have pretty shallow soils, shallow rocky soils, long winters, and short mild summers. So that's kind of what a boreal forest looks like, and that's the forest we're going to be referring to today. So, why do we care about the spruce budworm? Spruce budworm, despite, in my opinion, being a very charismatic insect, I actually find it to be really cute, especially having worked with it for so many years now. Can cause a lot of damage. It's considered one of the most destructive feeding insects in northern North America. It mines the needles of its host trees. You can see an image here of it kind of feeding on the needles of a host tree. And after lots of feeding, you start seeing this characteristic flagging at the terminal ends or the tips of branches. And it's kind of this like dead material, dead needles, as well as a bunch of webbing. And the webbing kind of makes me, when I first started looking at it, think of spiders, but a lot of that's just from the spruce budworm kind of constantly moving around. They almost always have that thread going, and it's a way for them to prevent from completely falling off of the branch. And after lots of defoliation, you start basically seeing complete needle loss. Again, this is kind of an up-close look at that flagging. And 2 to 3 years of repeated feeding on one tree can cause that tree to stop growing diameter-wise. And then after 3 to 5 years of that continued defoliation, so, from the beginning, 3 to 5 years, you start seeing tree mortality, and that's what this looks like across our landscape. And so, you know, as you all are here, I'm sure we all care about forests, and it's hard to go out there and see the mortality. So for Minnesota, where can we see spruce budworm? This is one of the more updated maps. This is from the Minnesota DNR, from some of the defoliation or areas that were impacted by spruce budworm in the year 2025. With here's a little spatial reference of where Duluth is. So if you know where Duluth is, you can kind of see that it's like mostly found northeast of that in Cook County. And the darker areas here represent more severe defoliation, with lighter areas being less impact. So this is just kind of the areas that were affected last year. However, that's just last year. And if you look at this graph here, the very, very final bar is the impact from last year. So the areas we were looking at before, despite it being pretty prolific, represents a small area in comparison to the areas we've had impacted in previous years. Specifically in 2024, over 700,000 acres of damage was mapped by the Minnesota DNR. And that is an area that's bigger than Isle Royale National Park in Lake Superior. So that's how much damage that is impacted sometimes by the spruce budworm. Not always, though. So we see here that there's a lot of fluctuation, right? So we have, lulls in population and then booms. And this is not uncharacteristic of spruce budworm. So populations of spruce budworm go through booms and busts over time. Here we have a graph where time's on the x-axis and population's on the y, kind of showing how the population can change or cycle through time. And it does, it cycles, it goes through these booms and busts, which is very characteristic. When these populations go from low to high populations, this is what's called an outbreak. So an outbreak is when the populations are at that high point. And what this looks like on our landscape is this. Lots and lots of mortality across the landscape. Like I said, in 2024, over 700,000 acres were impacted. So this cycle is dynamic. It's influenced by things like flight. It can be influenced by other factors like weather, availability of resources. So there's a lot of impacting factors. One of them, of which is what we're going to talk about today, natural enemies. So natural enemies are one of the things that can kind of help create those booms and busts across time. So now we know that spruce budworms eat the trees that we love, but what eats the spruce budworm, right? Obviously spiders, that was in the image. But there's also other organisms that feed on spruce budworm. And those include birds, mammals, insects, spiders, and actually some other cool ones. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. So for birds are a big part of the cycle. They do respond fast to outbreaks, so they are not kind of always there. At least a lot of these bird species aren't always feeding on spruce budworm, but they do follow spruce budworm outbreaks because it is a lot. For them, it's like a buffet, right? They're kind of like the food trucks that follow festivals. So they're just following these outbreaks and feeding on these insects because why not? They're there and they're just delicious food. Despite being a big part of this, they actually only consume about 2% of outbreaking populations, and there's roughly 25 species of birds that have been observed feeding on spruce budworm. Here we only have a couple samples like black-capped chickadee, red-breasted nuthatch, red-winged blackbird, common grackle, the red-breasted grosbeak, as well as thrushes, kinglets, vireos, warblers, sparrows, lots of others. But we actually have gold stars for some major predators here, and that is for the black-capped chickadee and the red-breasted nuthatch. And the reason they're getting gold stars here is because, like I said, those populations of spruce budworm go through lulls and booms, and even when they're at a lower point, black-capped chickadees and red-breasted nuthatch birds are always feeding on them, kind of always keeping that pressure down on those populations of budworm, even when they're small and even when the populations are small. Another bird that I'd like to emphasize is really cool and kind of important is the pine siskin. And the pine siskin is cool, in my opinion, because it's the only species of bird that has ever been observed feeding on the eggs of spruce budworm, which I find to be really fascinating. And I can't imagine how hard it is to find the eggs, when you're a predator, because they're not moving. They're kind of the same color as the needles that they're laying on, and they're usually found on the underside of the needles. So this bird must be really, really specifically interested in those eggs in order to be observed eating them. Otherwise, we also have mammals. We have mice, voles, and squirrels. Oh my. Specifically, one study found that squirrels were a major component for predation in outbreaking areas of spruce budworm. Because when they were dissected, they found that spruce budworm on average made up 51% of their diet, which is actually quite a lot considering all of the other things that squirrels can eat. We also have a section for insects and spiders here. As you can see, there's lots of diversity. This is going to be the group of predators that has the most diversity here. So first, we're going to talk about spiders. And spiders are cool. There's a bunch of different kinds of spiders that feed on spruce budworm. Specifically, they're kind of put into two different categories. Some are foliage hunters, some are web spinners, so they like wait or they go out and hunt, and those are the two different kinds. We have a jumping spider here on the bottom left. Jumping spiders are actually known for egg predation, just like the pine siskin. Otherwise, spiders are important. They're one of the bigger predators for insects, for the insects and spiders section, because on average per acre, there's about 73,000 spiders within the boreal forest. That's like the average number of spiders within 1 acre. Not to freak you out. I hope you still enjoy camping after this. But yeah, so they're kind of a big part of it. We also have dragonflies. Dragonflies are not a huge component of the predation of spruce budworm, but they have been observed feeding on them, and they've been described as like snatching them right out of the air. So they usually feed on the adult phase, the adult moth, and just grab them right out of the air and kind of just take them as a snack. But again, this isn't super common. We also have beetles. Beetles are part of the predation as well. They feed on mostly the larvae of the spruce budworm, because what happens is, if something messes with the branch, what happens is the spruce budworm will fall down. This is actually part of a defense mechanism, but they fall down and sometimes they reach the ground. And it's at that time where we have a lot of the predation from beetles. And this is going to be ladybugs, ground beetles. Basically, they're kind of opportunists. If the budworm is there, a beetle's going to eat it. So we also have ants. Ants are one of the insect types that feed on spruce budworm independent of whether or not there's an outbreak or a large population of spruce budworm, just because ants are everywhere. And so, if the population of spruce budworm is low, ants are still going to find them and feed on them. And so that makes them an important predator in that cycling process. Wasps are also known to feed on spruce budworm. This is mostly potter wasps. That's what this is an image of. It's a potter wasp. Potter wasps are solitary, and like I said, there aren't too many wasps out there feeding on spruce budworm, so they're not, just like the dragonflies, they're not terribly a large portion of the predation that's happening out in the field. We also have robber flies. Robber flies will feed on spruce budworm, but only in the juvenile form. This is an adult robber fly. So the juvenile form will look more like the image on the bottom right, which we'll discuss in a moment. But they will feed on mostly the pupae of the spruce budworm. So when they're in their cocoon, they're pretty vulnerable because they don't move. They can't really escape predation. And so juvenile robber flies will take advantage of that. Also, we have mites. Mites are one of the most prolific arthropods out in the forest, despite being really small. And because of their numbers, they can make up a large portion of the predation of spruce budworm. There's one specific species that has been observed feeding on spruce budworm is the whirligig mite. But yeah, so they're parasitic and predaceous, and those two types of mites will feed on spruce budworm. Surprisingly to me, I actually didn't know this before looking into the predators of spruce budworm, but plant bugs, that's what this is. Usually they feed on the juices of plants by, submitting what looks like a straw-like mouthpiece into a plant, and kind of like sucking out the juices. And For me, I was like, oh, that's a plant bug. They feed on plants. But according to the literature, they also feed on spruce budworm. And that can be at the larval stage or, so basically caterpillar stage or the cocoon stage for spruce budworm. Though mostly they feed on plants. And so this isn't a large component of the predation out there. Lastly, but not least, we have a ladybug. Surprisingly, this is a ladybug, but it's the juvenile form of a ladybug. Ladybugs are a big part of it, but mostly it happens when they're in their juvenile form. So this is kind of the predator out there. They'll take advantage of spruce budworm that aren't moving a lot, so mostly in the pupal form. All right. There are some other insects as well, but I put them in this category because of how their feeding works. So here we have the others category, which includes a lot of interesting predators that we'll cover really briefly, starting with parasitoids. Now, this is what I did a lot of my work on. I actually did, when I looked at insect natural enemies in Isle Royale National Park and areas near the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, I basically would collect spruce budworm, bring them back to my lab, and then rear them. And if they became adult moths, then they weren't parasitized. But often we would have between 10 and 30% of the spruce budworm collected have one of these types of insects emerge instead of having an adult moth appear. And that's just because they were parasitized by these insects. Parasites or parasitoids are I think really, really fascinating. There's so many dynamics out there for spruce budworm, but and its parasitoids. Parasitoids can be either wasps or they can be flies. Mostly those are the two types of parasitoids. And one of the biggest ways that they're different from traditional predators is they only have one insect that they feed on. So in order to reach maturity, right? So, and when they feed on this, it results in mortality. So that's what makes a parasitoid slightly different than a traditional predator is they really only feed on one organism instead of several budworms. It's just one. All right, we also have fish. This one also surprised me because it's like, all right, spruce budworm are in the trees, fish are in the water. There's probably not a lot of overlap. But there can be. And this is an image of a trout. And one study in Canada found that spruce budworm during an outbreak made up 60% of the fish's diet. And this was at all life stages of the spruce budworm. So whether the spruce budworm was a caterpillar or whether it was a moth. And so when the caterpillars, again, they fall down from the branches, if those branches are overhanging the water or over the water, they'll fall in and the fish will feed on them. Additionally, they will fly over the water and fish will snag them right out of the air. So we have predation from fish, and sometimes it makes up a lot of their diet. This one was also really interesting to me. I did not know that caterpillars eat other caterpillars. So we have here, this is what's called a spruce coneworm. And if you remember earlier, the picture of the spruce budworm, it looks very similar. And so they actually share their habitat and their life cycle overlap by quite a bit. So the spruce coneworm is found on spruce trees. Its favorite tree is the white spruce tree. It is slightly ahead developmentally, so it'll emerge a little bit earlier. It'll mature a little bit faster. And so because of that slight time delay, it's usually bigger, usually more developed, and it likes to feed on younger larvae of spruce budworm as well as the pupae or the cocoons of the spruce budworm. And I've actually seen this in the field. It's absolutely fascinating because I thought caterpillars, they feed on plants. That's not always true. Actually, speaking of that, spruce budworms also feed on spruce budworms. There has been some cannibalism of spruce budworm observed in the field. This mostly happens when the foliage is very, very low. So like when they're in one area and they've been in that area for many years, there aren't as many needles for them to feed on, so they're going to be more of an opportunist feeder where they feed on younger caterpillars or pupae that are, or the cocoons that have like recently become cocoons, because it takes a while for a cocoon to harden. And so they're kind of these soft, juicy meals that can't go anywhere. And so spruce budworm will feed on them. And there's cannibalism out there. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have pathogens. Pathogens are absolutely interesting. There's various types of pathogens, whether that be bacteria or fungi. Here we have a picture of an entomopathogenic, which if you break that word down, it's pathogenic. Entomopathogenic kind of just means like insect-eating pathogen. And this is a fungus here, but there's also, like I said, bacteria. Examples of this type of biocontrol that are pretty common out there are what's called BTK or BT, which is actually part of the traditional management plan for some areas for spruce budworm. And BT is a type of bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. So yeah, kind of they use nature to kind of help keep control of nature a little bit when they're managing things. All right, so spruce budworm is kind of always living alongside these predators, right? There's no world where the spruce budworm is, not going to be prey. Even when they have low levels of population, low density, they're always living alongside these other predators. This just means that these predators will help keep the numbers of spruce budworms lower than they otherwise would have been. So kind of keeping that pressure on top of them. So predators provide that top-down pressure or that mortality level on spruce budworm populations. And that's independent of where they're at within the outbreak cycle. So when the population is low, when the population is high, there's always some sort of predator that's out there looking for them and that's going to feed on them. And that's kind of why it's a big part of the cycle of spruce budworm. And that's why we care about them. They help us keep those numbers lower than they otherwise would be. Numbers of predators usually do fluctuate with the number of spruce budworms. And this makes sense. We've seen this graph before. So again, we have time on the x-axis and population on the y-axis. And here we have the green line, which is indicative of spruce budworm population. As I had mentioned earlier, they go through cycles. This can be impacted by flight, temperature, availability of resources, but again, it can be impacted by predators. And it's been seen that predators have almost a direct connection with these numbers of spruce budworm. So we have low and high numbers of spruce budworm here. And then this blue line is a representation of kind of what the numbers of predators can look like in response to these outbreaks, right? And there's a little bit of a time lag. See, I think you can see my pointer. So let's say, here we have low numbers, we have high numbers. When the numbers are low, the predators aren't going to have as good of a chance finding them. And so they're not going to have, much dependence on them. So the numbers of predators aren't going to be reliant on them at all. But then once the numbers of spruce budworm increase, they're a lot easier for predators to find. And what happens is they start finding them and they start feeding on them. And then their numbers, because of that nutritional difference, grow as well, or they become more concentrated. Let's say they find, birds find a population, then more birds come to that space. So it's all about, how fast can they find them, how well can they find them, and how much nutrition is provided there. But basically what happens is through time, the numbers of predators are corresponding with these numbers of spruce budworm in kind of like a time-lagged sort of way. So they're very much linked. What happens after numbers of spruce budworm are low is, after predators kind of help keep those back down, as well as maybe things like the climate. Let's say it's a cold year, or, they've eaten themselves out of house and home. There's no more host material. Let's say we have an outbreak fall, right? Again, partially due to predators. With fewer spruce budworm, we start seeing regeneration happening. So during outbreak years, there's lots of mortality. A lot of trees die, and this opens up space for regeneration to occur. This image here is a picture that I took of an area that is regenerating from an outbreak of spruce budworm 15 years before. And at this point, it's actually about 20 years. But at the time for images, it was 15 years of regeneration. And that's what this looked like. You can see there's lots of balsam fir that's coming back into that space. But that's not always what's going to happen, right? No matter what, the canopy often grows back in time. Sometimes there's species compositional changes. But basically what happens is it's kind of this cycle of trees die, trees come back, trees die, trees come back. This isn't new. Spruce budworm has, there's fossil evidence that spruce budworm has been here in Minnesota within the landscape for more than 10,000 years. So they are very much native. They're very much a natural process. They're part of where we live. They're part of the process. And what happens is when those trees come back, spruce budworm can revisit those areas. And then the cycle starts all over again. So if this is a natural process, why do we care? Why does this matter? Besides the fact that it's interesting and forests are cool and we all love them. But I think one of the things we should think about is with climate change, there's an increased likelihood that you're going to see more intense and more frequent outbreaks. And this is due to a couple of reasons. This could be partially because warmer years means bigger spruce budworm populations. They like warmer, drier years. Makes it so that they're able to live and kind of have that boom, have an easier year. Additionally, so with warming, that's a problem. Additionally, with warming, you start seeing changes of host trees because, for example, they don't generally feed on black spruce. And that's because black spruce is not, their needles aren't like edible at the time that the spruce budworm needs to feed on them. But that can change with climate change. With climate change, there's a worry that, those timeframes might sync up and then they have a brand new host tree that they can feed on. And that will change the numbers of spruce budworm, outbreak dynamics, and even their range. Also, there's implications for fire. With spruce budworm, there's lots of balsam fir mortality, usually when there's an outbreak, because balsam fir is their favorite, and it's pretty much a common tree across the landscape. And not only that, but it's a specifically intense tree for fuel. It can be considered a ladder fuel where it kind of is helping to bring fire from the forest ground into the forest canopy. And so with outbreaks, there's a concern that, you have more fire risk and more high intensity fire risk. With that in mind, it's easy for me to appreciate the predators that we reviewed. Not only because the insects for me are just so cool and animals are so cool, but I mean, they're really important part of this process and the natural process. And now I will take questions.
So, Jessica, let's keep your slides up, please, and then we'll ask the questions that were in the Q&A.
Sounds
Uh,
great.
let's see if I'm getting the top ones here. Yeah, any observations of ruffed grouse eating spruce bodworm?
Not when I looked in the literature. There were a bunch of species that were mentioned, 25 species. They do share a lot of habitat. I would not be surprised. Grouse are more kind of ground-based often, and I would imagine they would be an opportunist feeder. If they found a spruce budworm on the ground, then I would imagine they would eat them for sure. So,
Okay,
but that I know nothing in the literature that I know of.
thank you. Another question, do the budworms affect Norway spruce?
Norway spruce. Trying to think. I am not familiar with Norway spruce. 1 second. I'm not familiar with Norway spruce. I'm not sure. For me, I feel like I've been so deep in the Latin names. I could be mixing it up. I would imagine, I want to know what is Norway spruce. Sometimes when I think like Norwegian pine, it's red pine. So I'm like, okay, is Norwegian pine or Norwegian spruce black spruce or like another name for a tree that I already know. I don't know. I'm more of an insect person, less of a tree person. I know that they feed, even when numbers are high, they'll feed on pine trees, which is, it's pretty indicative that in dire circumstances, if there's going to be and they'll still feed on black spruce, even though there's a little bit of a mismatch there. So it's definitely likely. I would have to look into it though.
Okay, thank you. Another tree question. Are Fraser firs affected by spruce budworm?
Oh goodness. Fraser firs. I think the range is more. I Again, I don't know much about as much about trees as I probably should. Um, Likelihood says yes, especially because the range of the spruce budworm is pretty wide. I'd have to look into that though. I don't have an official answer.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Yeah.
What is the time scale from outbreak to regeneration back to a later successional stage if the forest ever gets to that stage?
Yeah, actually, this is fascinating. So for outbreak timeframes, traditionally, they occur every 35 to 40 years. So what happens is, for it to transition from a low to a high outbreak, that time frame is 35 to 40 years. And then when it is in an outbreak, that outbreak can last between 6 and 10 years. However, those are traditional timeframes. Those do vary based on the location. And here in Minnesota specifically, there's a lot of very unique stuff happening within Minnesota's spruce budworm population, which is why for my studies it was very fascinating. Because what you see is and Brian Schwingle with the Minnesota DNR created a wonderful map that shows this sort of time lapse, and it's about a 30 to 40-year cycle. But what is crazy is that there is always an outbreaking population, or always has been an outbreaking population within Minnesota since it was first surveyed for in 1954. So that's, if you think about the traditional time frame of like 35 to 40 years, that's much longer. And like, well, traditional time frames for outbreaks is 6 to 10 years. So why are we in Minnesota having one every year for over 50 years? That's just, it's a lot, right?
Mhm.
And it's because one of the reasons they are thinking is because it kind of moves, there's this pocket of population that moves across the landscape over time. And it actually syncs up with how long it takes for its host trees, balsam fir and white spruce, to reach maturity. So it will cycle through, and by the time that it's fed on one and defoliated a space, it'll move on. But then about 30, 40 years later, it'll return, and that's when those trees are mature again.
Mhm. Great. This may have been what you answered already. Is balsa fir their favorite due to the abundance in the landscape?
So it's not their favorite because of the abundance. One of so balsam fir are pretty homogeneous. They are abundant in the landscape. And that's partly because of I think historical management practices. Um, but the reason that they like the balsam fir is actually because of the timing when there is what's called bud burst. So bud burst is when the tree produces new fresh needles, and that's usually every spring, unless there's been defoliation in previous years. And the bud burst, what happens is those needles come out, and just like a lot of plants, when it creates new foliage or new plant material, it's soft, and that makes it like it's the timing of when that happens, and then the softness of that, and also some of the defense compounds are lower than in other trees, makes the balsam fir its preferred host. So like it's synced up with balsam fir, and then it just is like the perfect food for it.
Okay. Another question. Do outbreaks outpace regrowth? Also, what can we as citizens do?
This is a good question. This both are good questions. So it does not traditionally outpace regrowth. I'm usually what you see is, so they don't return. What happens with spruce budworm is when they defoliate a space, they actually will leave the space, which is one of the reasons why these cycles from low to high, these outbreaks, are influenced by flight. Because the spruce budworm can actually fly up to like 450, like hundreds of miles, right? So they can fly hundreds of miles. They can leave one space if there's no more food there and go to a new space. And what happens is they don't actually revisit, like, or they don't really go down into spaces that doesn't have food material ready for them. Um, so um, at least not on like a high number sort of a scale. So the forest does kind of get that chance most often to regenerate. Um, it's just that these numbers are very, very high here in Minnesota, and they kind of, like I said, cycle through the landscape. As far as what you can do as citizens, there's a lot of value in citizen science. You can, I don't know if you're familiar with iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a wonderful tool that you can use for all sorts of observational purposes. You can actually use it for looking for, specific trees of interest, insects of interest, such as anything outside of spruce budworm. You can use it for spruce budworm, or you can use it for, spongy moth, or if you see eastern hemlock, these are all plants and insects that, people want to know where they're at. And so part of that citizen reporting kind of helps the Minnesota DNR and managers know where they're seeing possible new booms and busts happening across the landscape. Because the way they do monitoring is they are doing a lot of aerial surveys, and aerial surveys are great for like landscape scale monitoring, but it's hard for them from the air to recognize where they're going to see, new booms. They do also do land monitoring. But there's only so many managers out there, right? So with us as citizens, we can help contribute to that.
Thank you, Jessica. Just want to make note, do look in the chat. We have some of our forestry team putting in links that might be beneficial for you to look at. And then the next question, are spruce budworms invasive in other Midwest states?
No, spruce budworm is not invasive. It is definitely a native insect, at least here. So when we consider what's invasive, it's kind of coming from an external place. Here, whether it's been introduced or naturally can't come here. Spruce budworm has been here for over 10,000 years. There's literally fossil evidence of it. And because its range is so far across the almost coast to coast, it's definitely not going to be considered invasive. That doesn't mean it's not problematic, especially with these changes from the climate and everything that can really change what that means for our forests. And so it's good to keep an eye on it, and I'm glad our managers are so proactive. But no, not invasive. Even if its range does change, it's not going to be considered invasive.
Another question, should we not plant balsam when we work on managing our forests or woodlands?
Oh, that's a really good question. And at this, it, what I learned, and this is actually at the Spruce Budworm Symposium, that was hosted, recently by the UMN Extension team. When all I can say is that event, even for me, even with my background, was like incredibly informative and wonderful to go to. I actually was able to go and learn about the management side of this, because that's not at all what I've looked at in my past. I've looked at, more of like under the scope, population cycling, less of the tree side. But what I understood is, it's all about stocking levels. If you see an area that has a lot of balsam fir, I wouldn't add balsam fir to it, right? One of the things you want to do in order to prevent impacts from spruce budworm is you want to diversify your forests. You want to add different species, of course, making sure that they are, still going to be in the right area, soil wise and environment wise. And actually, the UMN Extension team also, if I am correct, has like a climate ready woodlands planting list that you might want to take a look at for what you want to plant. But yeah, I would say it depends on how much balsam fir is there. Sorry, this is like the longest answer ever. But you want to make sure age-wise, if you have a lot of the same age for balsam fir, you want to do a different age. If you have a lot of balsam fir, maybe look at spruce, or because even hard deciduous hardwoods, because you really just want to diversify your forest. That helps prevent issues from spruce budworm, but it also prevents issues from other insects, other defoliating insects, which we have plenty of here because our forests are so prolifically filled with insects. So diversify your forests. Do it.
You want to contact a DNR forester in your area for some recommendations too.
Mhm.
Can outbreaks be predicted?
Yes, there's a lot of predictive tools out there for outbreaks. So, and they have different time scales. So if you wanted to, if you're a manager and you're looking at, where are we going to be next year? It's going to need some input information about things. You're also going to need to do on the ground sort of looks. But usually they're not 100% reliable yet. And that's because there's so many factors of like, how are they choosing this? And that's part of what I was looking at, where are they going? What's determining where they're going? And there's a lot of emerging research regarding that.
Mhm. If winter is colder, does that affect the budworm mortality?
It depends on if you're talking about winter or spring. So for example, if we have a really, really cold winter, um, because spruce budworm has been here for so long, it's hard to say. So a couple years back, we had a weird winter, right? It was cold, but then we also had warming periods. And so this like warm, cold winter, there was interest in whether or not that would impact or lower their numbers because they would, possibly wake up in the middle of winter and then wake up too soon, and that could cause mortality. Something like that could cause mortality, and that could be related to death from, cold air. But otherwise, they're very much evolved to be here, right? They have what they actually have chemicals within their system that represent like anti-freezing agents that people use in like their cars. And so like I can't remember the name. Antifreeze. So they have like chemicals related to antifreeze within their system that they use to help them overwinter. So usually the cold's not going to get them unless they have that weird cycle of waking up.
This is maybe more of a management question. How do the fires affect spruce and balsam regeneration?
Ooh, okay. Uh, that's a good question. I looked at forest regeneration under pressures of moose. So I didn't actually look. My specialty is not so much in regeneration post fire. I am very interested in that topic. I would love to learn a lot more about it. And I know that the UMN has a whole page dedicated to regeneration post fire, but I don't personally have that information for you.
Hmm. What winter temperatures will inhibit, kill the budworm, or another season in temperature more important? I'm not sure where that's going.
Well, whether it's cold or heat, all insects, all living things probably have, those maximums that they reach, right? Their thresholds that could induce mortality. I actually do not know offhand the exact number, and actually, that's what's called a I think it's called a super cool freezing point. Super cool. It's called a super cooling point. So if you are curious, you could look up super cooling point spruce budworm. I'm almost tempted to do it right now because then I could get that in my brain. But if you want to know, super cooling point for spruce budworm, and it'll tell you at what point they die. But one thing I can say for sure is here in Minnesota, that number is going to be very unlikely to be reached. And even if like the exterior ambient temperature is that temperature, that doesn't mean for sure that the spruce budworm will die because of other insulative factors such as tree bark, snow levels, because if they're under snow, they actually have more insulation. So there is that number out there in the world, super cooling point, spruce budworm, it'll tell you for how cold at what point cold wise they die. For heating, I'd have to say, and I'm not sure. I know that summer temperatures, as it is now, don't cause mortality for spruce budworm.
Okay, thank you. We may not get to all the questions, so if you could write down Jessica's email address there on the screen.
Yes,
If
please email me.
your question is not answered during this session, you can certainly email Jessica. Let's see. Do you think the increased usage of pesticides has anything to do with the increase in spruce budworm populations due to mortality of their insect predators?
Hmm. Uh, that's interesting. I would say like I would personally, if I were to fully confidently answer that, I would love to do more research. Granted, I'd love to do more research at any point in my life, but basically, I think probably not. And here's my reasoning. So with pesticides, depending on which one you're using, so for example, something like BTK, it's usually very specific to what you're trying to treat. And predators aren't usually the goal that they're trying to treat or decrease. For example, spongy moth, they do BTK sprays. A lot of people worried about, impacts on different species from those sprays. But usually, timing wise, the pesticides are only, uh, like active or effective for like a 2-day time frame. And it like the timing, like basically with pesticides, a lot of it's very specific. And I would say that these numbers, these booms and busts, are much more a factor from climate, like the warming climate being making ideal conditions, as well as dispersal like or flight between populations. Those things are probably going to be a huge part of it. Predation, of course, is a part of it, but I don't think that's being negatively impacted at all by pesticides. I think it would deserve more study, though. Can't say for sure, no.
Another question. Thank you, Jessica. Do they favor young as well as mature trees?
Actually, no. So spruce budworm really, really love light. And so the higher up they can be, the closer to the sun, the happier they are.
Hmm.
And they also prefer, the materials coming out of host trees that are more mature. So when you see a mature balsam, that's what they're going to go for. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't feed on younger trees. Let's say you have an outbreak, you're going to find them on younger trees in the space that there is an outbreak just because there's an overflow of insects.
Okay. Is there a historical record of budworm outbreaks in Minnesota before 1950?
Yes. So 1954 is when they started surveying aerially for spruce budworm. The first outbreak ever of spruce budworm was noted in Maine in 1804. And I'm pretty sure not long after that is when they actually started doing surveys for, like ground surveys for here in Minnesota.
Another question about pesticides and insecticides. Have pesticides or insecticides influenced populations in the past, thinking of windbreaks or forests located near farm fields or crops?
So are we talking about, I guess, yes, pesticides have impacted numbers of spruce budworms in the past. Usually that's because of directed intentional targeting of spruce budworm, right? Usually through applications of what's called BTK or the Bacillus thuringiensis. I forget what the K stands for, but basically applications of BTK do affect populations of spruce budworm, especially when timed appropriately. And there's a whole management strategy that's really famous in Maine for that, called the early intervention strategy. But as far as like agricultural pesticides, things like that, I don't think there's like a registered or historical note of any major impact from those on spruce budworm.
Maybe final question for now. Let's see. We're well south of the current Minnesota spruce budworm infestations with the kind of flying range grouped with climate change. What are the chances of it reaching my balsa firs in east central Minnesota?
East Central. I wish I knew the town. I would say so far, so like mostly and historically, they've been centered in northeastern Minnesota, right? That doesn't mean, like I said, they have quite the dispersal or flight capacity. They can fly hundreds and hundreds of miles. But if your balsam are not surrounded by a forest of balsam, or other related host trees, then your balsam are less likely to be affected by spruce budworm in the long term.
Why don't we stop there? If you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll end with a few other slides. Sarah, please. Let's see. Share. This one. Thank you very much. Very informative presentation, Dr. Jessica Roots. Thank you very much. Again, here's her email address. Certainly, if we didn't get to some of your questions today, please email her. All our webinars are recorded on a Z link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. Here's a list of our next series. Actually, we have 9 webinars this year. Our next one will be February 13th, and stewardship strategies for resilient forests. Also, we have Anna Stockstead on our web link here too, which she's hosting the Minnesota Family Woodlands Conference. That's March 13th and 14th. You can still register for that. You'll be asked to complete a evaluation after you leave the Zoom today. please fill that out for our recommendations and our knowledge and improving on the Zooms that we have for you. Here's a link. If you're not getting the My Minnesota Woods newsletter each month, you can get that there. Also, there's a link there, a Z-link to the Family Woodland Conference that Anna is hosting. And then again, all of our recordings of Fridays with the Forester are recorded as Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. We thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jessica Roots. Excellent presentation on spruce budworm. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you all for your questions. Please email me, especially if I didn't answer your question about favorite Fraser firs. I'm gonna look them up now, so I'll be ready.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us.